Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our live here on LinkedIn. Just a few kind of caveats if you're attending today. It is not a prerequisite to be bald and bearded with square frame glasses to be part of this group. That's just Stephen and I messing around. But a few housekeeping things. I wrote these down so I didn't forget. We're playing with new tech, so if we're actually not on the live, that is not intentional. Hopefully, we're there. Hopefully you can see us. If you're here, maybe pop something in chat so we know that it's actually working. The second thing is like, why this work? I don't know, was it about 3 to 4 months ago, Steve and I wrote down a couple statements. I remember sharing them with you. I said, leadership suffers in silos and thrives in community, right? So what we want to do here is just really build community. We're not getting paid, right? This is not our job. This is something that we just want to do for service to our friends and our community. And so, we're just thankful that you're here. Thanks, Johanna. That's my wife. Love that you're attending, spending time with us. The second thing I wrote down is we should be doing the hard stuff together, right? Leaders a lot of times want to put themselves on islands, and it's just a natural thing, right? We want to do it on our own. We want to prove ourselves. We want to get it done. And really, we should be reaching out to one another and seeking support. And so that's hopefully what we'll be trying to do with this body work. Good morning, Jeremy. The logo, why the cow? I was just messing around on Canva and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cute. That's a cow. We both have it. So if you want some merch, reach out to me. Let me know. Can hook you up. And I was researching cows, and they're really community oriented. They're highly community oriented. So I thought that represented what we're trying to do really, really well. And like what does Chinwag mean? Like why Chinwag Nation? And I was looking up words that represented a just like lighthearted conversation, loose conversation. And in Britain, I guess they use this term called chinwag, like you're wagging your chin, you're hanging out and chatting about stuff. And so just to kind of explain the logo and what and the name of this work, so you all understand. Couple of other things. This represents our opinion, right? This is not affiliated with any organization, past, present, future. This is just Stephen and I having a chat about leadership. And we hope that what we talk about today, when we talk about decision making, that it resonates with you, and maybe you'll be able to walk away with something. If there's anything you take away, it's a couple of things. Actually, a few things. The 4 types of leadership, which is autocratic, consensus, consultative, and delegated. And we'll talk about each one of those, the good and the bad. From a decision making standpoint, from a culture building standpoint, try to seek clarity, like who's owning the decision, what decision are we trying to make here, and give clarity, right? If you're the person running that initiative or project or body of work. And when Stephen and I say good and bad for leadership cultures, we understand that's subjective, right? The reason why I have Stephen on here with me is because we think differently, and hopefully we'll bring a different perspective. And what works for him might not work for me. And so he might think it's bad, but I think it's good. And we'll kind of talk about, so when we talk about and bring examples, we understand that some of the things we say may not work for you, and that's okay. So, that's quite a bit to chew on, but wanted to kind of level set with you all as we kind of go into things. Stephen, your thoughts before we go into it?
I just want to first apologize to everybody because I woke up this morning sick, but I wasn't going to miss the stream, our first live. So bear with me if my voice isn't coming through clearly. But I'm really looking forward to this. Again, it's meant to be a conversation, and again, with the key concepts of third place leadership, just really making sure that this is a dialogue for everybody. So please use that chat function, because we want to make sure that we're including you all in this conversation as much as our platform will allow, and I want to make sure that we're talking about things that are pertinent to you. So just looking forward to being part of this dialogue.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, there's I think we got Jeremy in here. We've got my wife. So love the engagement, love the feedback. Let us know how we're doing as we're going throughout. Keep it going. And I before we talk about autocratic leadership, and we'll kind of define that for those that are on the call. Um, we both believe that decision making and clarity in decision making is probably one of the most underestimated things that organizations do or don't pay attention to. It is fundamental for your culture. If decision making is clear in terms of who owns it and where it sits, it fosters trust. It fosters clarity. I think Brene Brown says, "Clear is kind," right? And so it's an act of kindness to be clear about decision making. And so it's an important subject to both of us. And so let's just dig into it. One of the first types of decision making is autocratic. And I think there's a good and a bad to that. Autocratic, basically, it's an autocracy, right? There's one person or there's one group that holds all the power and they really make all the decisions. And where I think that might be appropriate. And Stephen, I'm wondering Stephen, what are your thoughts? Like, when is it like appropriate to be kind of in an autocratic decision-making style?
Yeah, I think before I even dive into that, it's important to talk about the culture in which you're working in, right? Because when a role is established, especially looking at a traditional hierarchy within an organization, the higher up a position is, the higher level of decision making authority that they have, right? Traditionally, but we see a lot of times people who will either underestimate their ability to or their authority to make decisions. That or some people try to avoid having to make decisions because making decisions can be hard, right? But with that hierarchy also comes representation of the people that report directly to you. And it's very difficult to make decisions in an autocratic type of way when you don't have a trust or understanding with the team below you. So if you're a brand new leader, for example, and you're having to make some high level, high risk, stressful decisions right off the bat, you're going to need to have some communication planning around that. So that way your team understands and buys into why you had to make the decision that you had to make. But I think a leader is best equipped in that sort of autocratic space when they have the trust of their team, they understand their team's work, they understand the strategy of the organization as well as their division or their area, right? So that way, if they are in a situation where push comes to shove and they have to make a decision in that sort of autocratic fashion, that they, without having to bring people in the room for consensus or collaboration, right? They can internally have that collaboration and understand what's going to be the best decision for the team. Because sometimes as a leader, especially a more senior leader, there's stressful, high pressure situations where you're forced to make a decision on your own. And you don't have that luxury of time, regardless of whether or not you'd like to bring everybody in.
Yeah, I think there's a natural tension, right, with autocratic leadership. When, especially to your point, when there's no trust, or if maybe there's trust, but normally a decision making was kind of collectively done, but all of a sudden the leader makes the decision quickly when they normally would bring the team in, right? That might create tension. And to your point, if there's no trust, maybe the intent would be assumed to be bad, right? They don't trust me, or why are they making that decision when they normally would bring us, into the situation. And I think there's a potential for tension too, if, like, say you're a new employee and you join an organization and the organization says, like Amazon, right? We're a holacracy. We distribute decision making across every position at every level across the organization. Just self-organize and get the thing done. And then all of a sudden somebody, maybe one team within the organization operates within the autocracy, right? So the organizational culture is in conflict with the team culture, right? And I think that applies maybe to every, every decision-making style. So, but yeah, I think that's I personally, autocracy is not my favorite, right? If you have a leadership team, that's capable and there's trust, you should delegate, right? You should bring them into the fold. You should include them in the decision making. But I agree. Something else that you mentioned, like as you go up, you assume certain decision making responsibilities and assume certain risk. And so if it makes sense for you to make a decision, because it means that you're taking on the risk versus your team, I think that's where it's also kind of appropriate, and makes more sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, starting with autocratic, it's always a little bit difficult when you talk about the different quadrants in which people can fall in terms of their behavioral patterns. There's that authoritative, and sometimes they'll even use the term the
Yeah. Right.
dictator, right? As part of a team. And for people who aren't in that quadrant, sometimes that can be really
Yeah.
off-putting, that the sound
Yeah.
of that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that um, that's a bad thing, right? In fact, research shows time and time again that it takes a little bit of everybody to make a team
Hmm.
operate. And with these decision making styles, very rarely is somebody going to be only making decisions in one of these
That's true.
categories,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a time and a
Situationally,
place
right,
for
it might
everything,
require
right?
something different.
Because I mean, similar to you, Brian, I don't like having to make decisions on my own, that impact other people without bringing
Yeah.
them in. But there's a time and a place where, given the nature of my role, it was an expectation of me to have to make those decisions. And frankly, it would not be fair to me to have to delegate those
Yeah.
decisions out, because those that were reporting directly to me, that level of decision making authority wasn't a part of their job description. And for me to try to punt that stress
That's a
off
good call.
or that accountability
Some
to
people
somebody
don't want
else,
it.
right? Wasn't
Some people are
no.
like, "You're
I
good,
mean,
man. Just make all the decisions. I'll just deliver the thing." Right.
and even in a leadership role, you may not
Yeah,
want it, but
that's
if
true.
you're accountable for it, you need to
Yeah,
do it.
that's a good call.
And I think that comes back to this whole concept of third place leadership, right? Like those decisions are stressful.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're really hard,
Yeah,
sometimes they're really heavy.
yeah.
And, having people that you can talk to about it, if you're doing the right thing and taking accountability where you're supposed to be taking accountable for, it's important.
Awesome. Hey, just a quick tech check. Um, do I look green? Uh,
Yeah.
thanks, Stephen. I was asking you. I was asking people in the chat. Hey, Crystal. Good morning. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about the next type of decision making uh, style, which is consensus like decision making. And to your point earlier, right? Situations kind of can call for this. Like, I think it's kind of if you have the time, do consensus building type of decision making. Otherwise, and this term was used the other day, right? You get into that I heard somebody use the other day. You get into analysis paralysis sometimes. Uh, yeah, is that you saying yes, Johanna? That I look green? A little.
Crystal's being
Thanks,
very nice and
Crystal.
just a little.
But yeah, so tell me about how you feel about consensus building decision making. I mean, disclaimer, Stephen and I have worked together in the past. And Stephen, you were great about this, right? You really brought your team into kind of decision making, and it made us feel like included. We felt like we knew all the things, but sometimes, right, we just need to move fast. And I've been in those scenarios too, where I was leading a field office, and um, we didn't have time to like dig into every piece of data and every piece of information, right? And have a
Yeah.
group conversation. And sometimes I've been in rooms where it's like 20 people and you can never get to a decision because everybody has to say something. And next thing you know, the hours sucked up, but what do you think about consensus building?
E- with consensus, as somebody like myself who's a proud nerd, like
You are a
one of
proud
the
nerd.
best things about I am a
I'm
proud nerd.
surprised
One
you
of the
didn't throw
best
up
things
like
about consensus,
the Spock. Yeah.
um,
Or Vulcan.
one of the best things about that is that you can get the most amount of information possible
That's a
from your
good call.
team during that decision making time period. But to your point, right, there is a time
Yeah.
limit. And so with consensus, which is one of the ways that I like to make decisions, it's really important to apply some certain, I would say, like OCM, organizational change management practices around that. And first, setting expectations of the conversation, one of which is, a decision is going to have to be made, and the likelihood of us getting everybody on board is relatively low, but the majority, absolutely, given the time period. And then the other important thing about consensus is making sure that you're not stopping when the decision is made on having the conversation around, hey, you've made a decision. Maybe it went against one or two individuals in the room, and explaining why you had to make that decision and making sure that they still feel
Mm.
heard. And then in future decisions, making sure that you don't have a potential bias towards certain opinions versus others, right? When you're making that decision. And that kind of goes back to collaborative,
Mhm.
um, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or
Yeah,
consultative,
constant.
excuse
Yeah,
me.
yeah. I mean, you look it up
Because
online, and there's
it's
probably
hard,
like I think there's like a list of 5, right? There's other decision making,
right?
but we're really focusing on 4. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at like the jury
Mm.
process, right? Sometimes juries will deliberate for days before they
That's kind of a big
get a
decision,
unanimous decision.
probably though, right? Like
Right.
you're changing
Yeah,
somebody's life.
absolutely.
But to your point,
And sometimes you're not given days to
no,
be able to
that's
make
a
that decision. So it's tough.
yeah, that's a good concept, right? Or that's a good thought because if it's a really expensive decision, for an organization, or maybe it's a complete shift in strategy, um, right? You might want the right people aligned right before
Yeah.
you move forward. And I've seen that where
Yeah.
that lack of alignment in a leadership team is talking about like the good and the bad, right, of leadership cultures. If there's a lack of alignment, if you and I, Stephen, are on a leadership team and you're going and saying, "Hey, this training is the best thing since sliced bread," and I'm going out there being like, "This sucks," right?
Yeah.
It's immediately a failed initiative, you know. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good call. All right, let's go into consultative. What is it, Stephen, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Consultative is where you go to a group of individuals and you say, "Hey, I really want to be informed based off of your opinions, and maybe we can dialogue about this, but ultimately I'm going to have to make a decision." And I highlight the "I'm" because you're still saying that accountability falls on me. I have to make that decision. I have to own that decision, but I want to go into it with some very deliberate, I should say, data points from the team before I make that decision.
What do you? I mean, good and the bad. Where have you seen it work out? Where have you seen it not?
Um, I mean, the good is that people can feel included in the decision making process. The bad, I would say that there's two types of bad. Sometimes, um, as a leader, people have gone into this consultative space with an idea of how they already want to make that decision, and then they won't change it based off of
Yeah,
the
it's
engagement
a
that
it's a
they've had with
fake
people.
involvement, right? It's a fake
Right.
consultative
Yeah.
process. Yeah,
And so that can have drastic cultural
yeah.
impacts, right, on how people feel about their authority and their power and their voice. And speaking of voice, right, the other is with consultative, traditionally you are making a decision, and because you've gathered everybody's input, but you're not looking necessarily for consensus, there's going to be
Mhm.
voices that you are potentially knowingly going to go against when you make
I
that decision, and making sure that those people still feel included, and also being again aware of your biases, because if you primarily go and make consultative decisions but you're just using the opinions of maybe two of the larger
or the
talkers in the
people that
room of four,
you've maybe built a better relationship with,
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Then how are people going to feel if they've got good things to say, and you're not necessarily representing their voice in the decisions, or they're not necessarily speaking up because they don't feel comfortable
Yeah,
doing
I
it, right?
think when I think about so I want to share a couple of things and then we'll close this out and move on to the last decision making style, leaving maybe a few minutes for folks to ask us some questions in the chat. Um one is I think out of all the decision making styles, consultative is probably the most important item where you have to go back and close the loop, right? where you actually have to, you know, make sure that you said, hey, you provided this consultation. Here's where we landed and why. I remember
Yeah.
one of my favorite mentors of all time, and some of you are on the call know who this person is, Billy Wright. Um, she always used to say, if you're going to ask for feedback, and we would talk about surveys, right, which is a consultative form of decision making. If you think about right the intent and the idea, she'd say, if you're going to ask for feedback, do something with it, and then let people know what you did or didn't do with it, right? Because then, to your point
Yeah.
earlier, it closes a loop, it fosters trust, and it ensures the integrity of the intent of that, right, that decision making process. The second point, before we kind of go into this last decision making style, is Stephen and I are not exempt from the good or the bad, right? In either one of these, we both have put our foot in our mouth. We both have messed up. We both have tried to go out with good intent, and then found out that however we did it, it just didn't work, right? It didn't work for people. And so when we talk about these things, we are trying to come from a humble space, right? We're not trying to call anything or anybody out. It's because we've done all these things. That's how we know, right? I think between the two of us, we have over 40 years of leading teams, combined, and leading groups and initiatives and projects. So we've experienced both the good and the bad to us, but we've also done both the good and the bad. I think that's how you learn how to become a better leader.
Yeah.
And so the last decision making style that we're going to talk about, and then we'll open it up for some questions if you all have them, is delegated. And I'm going to have you go through this one again, Stephen, because I know this is one of your favorites, right? And when I remember working with you, you're like, how can I empower my leaders to be leaders within their roles and make decisions, and then
Right.
also learn from them? I remember reading
Yeah.
one time, and I love this because it keeps me centered as a leader, and that's 99% of decisions are fixable, right? They're reversible. You can you
Yeah.
can help somebody learn from it. You can actually, it's okay, right, to make a decision and not work out. But yeah,
Yeah.
break it down and close us out. We have about 3 minutes before we open it up for questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think you covered it really well, Brian, right? You're essentially holding other people either responsible or accountable for making certain decisions, right? And I think it's really important to make sure, one, that you're giving people the decision making authority and supporting them in that based off of how their position is structured,
Yeah.
right? Or if they have some growth ambitions, providing the opportunity for mentorship. And I think mentorship is really important when you delegate that authority for decision making, because I will tell you that there's been many a times, because I love to promote an organization that's sort of flipped upside down,
Or the
right? In the
upside down
sense that the
pyramid.
higher up you traditionally
Yeah.
are, right, you're serving as a foundational advocate, and a big part of that is empowering your people to make decisions. And I have seen and witnessed decisions being made that I might not necessarily agree with, but that
Have I ever
they're
done
ultimately
that?
communicating. Many a
Okay.
times, Brian. And I'll sit there and I'm like scratching and itching because
Making
I
you
know I'm
nervous,
just
squirming
gonna.
in your seat.
Um, but ultimately, what I'm immediately doing is thinking, like, how can I support these people through the good and the bad of that decision? And hey, maybe it's a
Sure.
learning opportunity for
Yeah.
me as well. Um, and Brian, there's been decisions that you've made that have been learning opportunities for me where they turned out a lot better than I ever thought they could be. Right.
You're so
But the
kind.
biggest thing is just supporting folks in that decision making, because like you were mentioning before, right, we're speaking about our
Yeah.
experience, and so maybe I've made this mistake 5 times, but it's somebody's first time to be able to
Yeah.
learn, right? And you also have to be really careful of your authority, because even if you're giving opinions to your staff about how you feel a decision should be made, you're in a position of authority, and they may feel influenced to make the decision that their boss wants them to make, right?
No, that's a good
So
call.
a lot of times it's about being patient and sitting back
Yep.
and watching things unfold and figuring out how you can
That's a
support.
great call.
You know,
That's the uh in the what, I don't know, the blind delegated decision making, right? Where like you think
yeah,
of something and you state something in a room, and and then the people go and action it, and you're like, wait a second, I didn't ask for that, but that's great. Here we
yeah,
go.
yeah.
All right, so we're at about 5 minutes left. One nugget from you, Stephen, for people to take away for this whole conversation, and then we'll just open it up in chat if people have any questions to close us up.
Just again, I think it's just really embracing your position's decision making authority and really using that as an asset, and you know having those conversations culturally about, hey, I need to be making these decisions, or you need to be making these types. It's just so critical because it's clarity and communication. It ultimately develops trust, and it should play into how you're developing strategy across your organization. But chances are you're going to be using all four of these types of
Hmm.
decision making styles, even though you may prefer to go to one.
Awesome, love it. All right, we have about 3 minutes left. I've got, if you saw me typing, I've got like my LinkedIn chat over here. I'm using this thing called Restream, and I have like YouTube chat over here. So my wife's messaging in YouTube. I saw Jeremy and Crystal in LinkedIn. But are there any questions? We have probably time for like one question. Are there any questions that you want us to dig into with this conversation, or maybe it's something else that you want us to just reflect upon before we close it out today? And we'll give everybody a few seconds here, and then we'll hop. Wish you all a great day. Steven, there's like a slight delay, so like it's recording us here, but on LinkedIn, it's so weird to see me like 3 seconds later. Any questions for us?
Like you might be
All
off the
right.
hook.
So
Oh,
Crystal said, I generally have a preference to do some kind of shared decision making style. However, I found it can be difficult without certain items and structures in place, time, ensure people have the right info, clarity, etc. What is your opinion on this, and where have you seen these items and structures implemented successfully? Thoughts, Stephen? I have thoughts, but you.
so I mean, my mind immediately goes to, shared decision making is one of my favorites, but you don't always have the variables that allow for that, right? And so we were talking about autocratic decision making, and sometimes you have to just make a decision because the pressure's on. You don't have the time. You don't have the luxury of being able to consult. And so be thinking about all the things you could have done before you had to make that decision. So that way you have your team's buy in, even when you have to make a decision on your own. Um, but then also, how do you set yourself up to allow for as many shared decision making opportunities as possible? Are there ways that you could fix processes? Are there ways that you could be fixing communication, right? To set yourself up to have the variables in place to be able to do shared decision making.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, there's a term. Again, I'm a nerd on this stuff. So there's a term called dialogic OD, and basically it says you design the space for the dialogue, right? So you got to think about the people in the room. You got to think about, maybe they have a trigger with that type of a structure. Maybe they have had bad experiences. So just learning about the people before you bring them into a room to have a conversation. Crystal, I agree. I generally sometimes have the same challenges. It's why I kind of bring in a multitude of things to kind of um, help foster dialogue before a decision's made. And but I've never seen it done perfectly in any organization that I've been in. It's it's that plan, do, check, adjust. I know you're a lean person, right? It's that plan, do, check, adjust. To Stephen's point, what did you learn, and then try to get better, a little bit better every time. And then Jeremy says, how do you determine which decisions to make independently versus collaboratively? Through failure. You think it should be an independent decision, and you're like, oh crap, I probably should have brought more people in, and vice versa. You think it should have been a collaborative decision, but it was like that took way too long. And so it just depends on I think what Stephen has been echoing this whole time, and that's situationally, like really try to understand the situation and design the decision making around that. But it's really failure. Like you just have to practice and be willing to step out and try it out and take some risks. So Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Stephen, for the conversation and the time. This actually was a lot less painless from a technology standpoint than I thought it was going to be. And we'll see you all next week. We're actually going to be covering "The Power of Mattering" by Zach Mercurio. I had the honor of being on his book launch team, so I got an early copy of the release. We'll be talking about mattering, and the general idea is if people feel like they matter, they're going to act like they matter. And so, really excited to dig into that with you all next week. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Stephen.